You can find them on Twitter, you can find them on the gram. After listening to their podcast, you'll be sitting there like, damn, taking their teaching from one level to the next, reaching up to Canada and down to Mexico.
So can you give us a little bit of, an overview of what the documentary is about?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, I'm going to back up just a little bit, because we actually did that research, and the person who paid us to do it wasn't interested in that film. That is the film about girls' education. And so we, though, on the other hand, were so excited by what we had heard, because now people talk about it a lot, but this was sort of 12 years ago-ish, something like that. And really people outside the development community weren't talking about it very much. So it was like, we describe it as this sort of eddy, this whirlpool, and all of this knowledge was going around, this conversation was going around and around, and it wasn't slopping over. No one else was hearing about it. And the other thing that was really exciting to us about it was it was grounded in a really basic, fundamental truth. It was an indisputable truth. And as a journalist, you don't come across that very often. The truth is really pretty complicated most of the time, and there are usually multiple truths, but there was a purity about this one. So in other words, you could discuss why girls aren't educated. You can debate the issues. You can debate what to do about the issues. You can even debate whether girls should be educated. But what you cannot debate is what happens when they are educated. The facts are there. And so that was the purity of that was really exciting, because you can wrap your head around it, right? It's not, here you're taking this giant issue of global poverty that seems just insurmountable and complicated. And it is complicated, and maybe it's insurmountable, but I hope not. But here is actually a way forward. And it's also complicated to get all girls educated, but it's doable. And it's something you can talk about it, and something you can do something about. So that really excited us. And so we really wanted to do this. And because we thought, if we hadn't known this, and then we started talking about it and found out our smart friends hadn't known it, and their smart friends hadn't known it, and we were all well-traveled. We had all lived in other parts of the world. We had all traveled in the developing world, but we didn't know this. So that meant there were a whole lot of people who didn't know it. And we figured if we got excited about it, so would everyone else. And if we wanted to do something about it, so would everyone else if they knew about it. And so we decided that we were going to make a film, and but we also decided that we wanted the film really not to stand on its own, but to be created as the centerpiece of a campaign that would support a global movement that was already beginning to happen. And so we did something very unusual, which is we actually started the campaign ahead of the film. So we launched Girl Rising 4 months before we released the film. And so in the process of making the film, and I'll go back to the film itself in a minute, in the process of making the film, we were building our partnerships. So corporate partnerships, community partnerships, partnerships with nonprofit organizations, with educators, with all of those things. So the idea was to create a community that would be ready to use this powerful tool once it was ready.
That's a smart idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah, no, we didn't know what we were doing. We were pretty sure we could make a good film because that's what we did.
Right.
But we didn't know anything about the rest of this stuff. So it was I sort of joke around that it was like, Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney, let's put on a show, and you just sort of do it. So the film was made with that in mind. So the film was made to be really, really useful. And as you know, the film tells 9 separate stories about 9 girls growing up in different countries in the developing world. Each of them confronting the barriers to their independence. And as we say, the films deal with the really hard issues that girls face and the challenges that girls face and those barriers. But in the end, they're really about hope, and they're about promise, and they're about potential, and they're about what can and what should be. So it was really important us to do as best we could to try and make the films as authentic as possible, to allow the girls' stories to be as authentic as possible. And we were a bunch of people from, most of us were from here in the US and not from these countries. And, so what Richard Robbins, the director, came up with, which I think was super clever, and the executive producer, Tom Yellen, was this idea of pairing each of these girls with a woman writer from her own country to help give voice to the story. And what Richard also did, which I think was actually genius, was he committed to allowing the writer to make the final selection of the girl.
Wow.
And then a well-known actor voiced each of these stories. And each of the stories is told differently. So in some cases we use animation. In some cases the girl acts as herself. In some cases the girl is herself in more documentary style. And in a few cases where it was not safe for the girl to be in the film at all, we used actors.
Wow.
So.
Yeah.
But the point.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was saying, but the point being that the film could be seen as a whole, and it was in movie theaters, on television. CNN broadcast it here and broadcast it globally as well, and in screenings and community settings and other things like that. But it could also be shown in these bite-sized pieces.
Right.
So you can look at the whole thing, as I said, or you can watch a 30-minute version with 3 of the stories, or one story at a time, and we'll get into the value that has to educators and being able to sort of slice and dice it. But it also had enormous value as a tool in a campaign and a movement.
Thanks for listening to the Teacher Nerds podcast. Keep up with every new episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, or anywhere you listen. Remember to visit teachernerds.com, and that's nerds with a Z. Follow us on Twitter @TeacherNerds and on Instagram @TeacherNerdsPodcast. And thank you for being one of the Teacher Nerds.